So to start off with, the question that I want to think about throughout this entire sermon is, who is the hero of the story? I'm going to ask this now. I'm going to go off on a super long tangent for the entire sermon, and then at the end we'll address that question once again. So again, the question to think about is, who is the hero of this story? So to kind of summarize everything we just read, it's, again, a bit of a longer piece of scripture. So I'm going to summarize it real quick and give a little bit of background as we do so. It starts out with Naaman, this man, a commander of the army of Aram. And we can note the description that we have. He's the commander of an army. He's a great man. He's highly regarded. He's a valiant soldier. And then there's that but. It's, despite all these other qualities, there's something else about him, something more important. The one thing that everyone notes about him is that he has leprosy. Despite all these other qualities, the attribute that stands out is the fact that he has this disease. Now, leprosy is a terrible disease. There's no cure for it. It's very contagious, and ultimately it leads to your death. It's so bad that people would be ripped away from their friends and family, and they would be quarantined outside the city. They would have to go and live on their own so that they wouldn't be able to infect or contaminate anyone else. And then, as it's the priest's job to cleanse people and to make sure people are clean and holy, it was the priest's job to go out and make sure they were fully healed of it before they were allowed to return to the city. So Naaman, this man, has leprosy, a terrible disease that would ultimately kill him. And of course, he wants to be healed of it. The second thing to kind of think about and talk about is the country of Aram. When I was reading through this, I had absolutely never heard of this country before. But we can think of it as Syria, almost. It was Israel's neighbor to the northeast, and it was Israel's enemy as well. They would often conduct raids on Israel and plunder and loot their villages, taking their gold, food, any kind of valuable material they can, including girls that they could use as slaves. And the slave girl, the servant girl that we have in this passage, this is how she was captured. She was captured in one of these raids from Aram on Israel. And I thought it was really interesting that the source of Naaman's healing comes from this girl. In a way, the source of Naaman's healing comes from Israel, just like our healing comes from Jesus, who was born in the tribe of Judah, Judah being a tribe of Israel. So, like Naaman's healing comes from Israel, our healing comes from Israel as well. And that was just something cool that I thought I would share. How does this healing actually come about, though? So the servant girl is seeing Naaman. She knows Naaman has leprosy, and she makes the comment, hey, there is a prophet in Samaria who can heal you. And I have to imagine that Naaman is absolutely amazed at this, going, hey, I'm sick, no one can heal me. And here this girl is saying that there's a prophet who can heal me. So I'm sure he's super excited, and he goes to his master, the king of Aram, and he's like, hey, there's a prophet in Israel who can heal me. And we already know that the king likes this man. He's the one who calls him a valiant soldier, highly regarded. Right? So he's like, go to the king of Israel and, get healed. And we know that he is super excited about this as well, because he's like, I'll even send you a letter. But he makes a mistake, and he doesn't fully listen to what Naaman says. Naaman says, hey, there's a prophet in Israel. And then the king of Aram writes a letter to the king of Israel. The letter does not go to Elisha, the prophet, it goes to the king. And the king of Israel can't heal him. As he's reading this letter, hey, heal my servant, he thinks that he's being mocked and made fun of. Like, hey, you can't do this. And he is absolutely distraught. He rips his clothes, and he's really mad and frustrated. And it's not until Elisha hears of this that this gets resolved. Elisha hears that the king is upset and rips his clothes and says, hey, send Naaman to me. I'll heal him. I'll take care of him. So Naaman takes his whole entourage over to Elisha's small little house, and he stops outside. And Elisha doesn't even come outside. He sends a servant to tell Naaman to go wash himself 7 times in the Jordan River, and he would be healed. This is not what Naaman is expecting. He expects this large, extravagant miracle done by a prophet, not to just wash himself 7 times in the small, little, dirty Jordan River. 1, he doesn't even see Elisha the prophet, and 2, why wouldn't he go wash himself in a larger river, a nicer river, like the Abana or the Pharpar? These were very large rivers in Damascus. So Naaman is just absolutely in a rage. He feels disrespected that the prophet didn't come out and see him, and he is upset. It seems too simple of a cure. Why wouldn't you come out and make a large spectacle of this? Why would I just go wash myself, 7 times? So he is in this rage. Like, this is not what he wanted. And his servants come to him, and his servants go, hey, if the prophet had told you to go do something big, something great, you would have done it, right? So what's the difference between doing that and doing something small and easy? Why not at least try it? What's any different about it? Right? Today, we might say something like, what do you have to lose? It's not what you expected, but you might as well try it. So eventually he goes and he washes himself 7 times in the Jordan River, and he's healed. Then he goes back to Elisha, and this is, imagine him, very humbling experience. And he says, now I know there is no God in the world except in Israel, so please accept a gift from your servant. Elisha doesn't accept the money, so Naaman, has to be okay with that. He grabs some dirt, takes it back with him to Aram, and then asks in advance for forgiveness, because his job requires that he bow down in the temple of Rimmon with the king of Aram. And he goes, I'm not worshiping this God, but I have to bow down in this temple for my job. So he asks for forgiveness in advance, and Elisha tells him, go in peace. Again, a longer story, but there is a couple key things that we can take from this. So I have a couple of points here that I want to point out and talk about. And the first one is that your position doesn't matter. Naaman was this commander of a great army, but that doesn't make him impervious. He could still get hurt, he could still get sick, and he needed healing that he couldn't give himself. And then we have the king of Aram and the king of Israel. They couldn't offer him healing either. These are rich, powerful rulers, and they're absolutely helpless in curing him. It was only God that could heal him through faith. And it's the faith that started with a young servant girl. This girl had no position of power. She had no authority. She wasn't rich, and she wasn't famous. She was simply a slave that had been captured from her homeland, but it was her faith that led to Naaman's healing. The same is true for our lives today. There are things that are completely out of your control. There are things completely out of my control. Things that no amount of wealth, no amount of power, popularity, or prestige will protect you or heal you from. At the same time, it doesn't matter who you are, though. Faith can always come through. If you put your trust in God and have faith in Him, it doesn't matter your position in life. God can and will continue to use you in amazing ways. Think about it. If God can use a servant girl forcibly taken from her home, God can use you too. The second point I want to talk about is that God does not exclusively work in the extraordinary, but He works in the ordinary too. Throughout the Bible, God obviously does these really large and extravagant miracles. We see Him part the Red Sea. We see Him bring fire down to an altar on Mount Carmel, where we get Elijah and the prophets of Baal. But He also does the small, seemingly ordinary miracles. Because God doesn't have to make a spectacle in order to complete His will. Naaman wanted this big spectacle. He wanted something grand, something amazing to happen in order for him to be healed. But he didn't have to do anything big or spectacular. He had to just wash himself 7 times, not in the largest, most impressive rivers around, but in the small, dirty Jordan River. Again, it's not about Naaman's status. It's not about his power. It's not about his expectations. It's about his belief and willingness to follow instructions that lead to his healing. Again, in our lives, like Naaman, we can sometimes fall into that trap of having expectations from God. Expecting God to do something huge, amazing, or spectacular in our lives. And that might happen. But you can also find him working in the small, ordinary, day-to-day things as well. So point number 2, as I mentioned, was God doesn't exclusively work in the extraordinary. He works in the ordinary too. Don't limit God by your expectations of him. And finally, point number 3, God's favor cannot be bought. In verse 5, we see that Naaman took 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. There was a man back in the 80s who did some math with this, and he estimated that it was about $1.2 million then. So today, I imagine it's much more than that. And this is just showing how badly Naaman really wants healed. He's willing to take all this money to go and find someone to heal him. We have those kings. They have tons of money too, and they can't heal him. Despite all this wealth, he could not be healed. We can assume he's even tried other medicine men, other doctors who claim to be able to heal him. I'm sure he's tried everything he can possibly find out and try, but none of them have been successful. And when he finally is healed by Elisha, he is more than willing to pay and accept gifts. He literally says here, take these gifts from your servant as a form of payment. As we talked about already, it was never about who Naaman was, though. It was not about his prestige or power, but it was also never about his wealth. He could have paid millions and millions and millions of dollars, but that's not what it was about. This sick man showed up with a vast amount of money, hoping to pay to be cured. But as he learned, God doesn't work for money. No amount of money would have been enough for God to heal him. Rather, this story is a story about God's power, a power that can't be bought and that can't be manipulated through money or wealth or power. All God asked for was obedience and faith. By having faith and being obedient to the commands, Naaman was healed. In the same way, by having faith and being obedient, we too can be healed and we too can be forgiven. Because it's not about who you are, it's not about how rich you are, it's not about any of those things. What it's about is our willingness to trust him, to have faith in him, and just to listen and obey his commands. So to wrap up those 3 points again, your position doesn't matter. If you have faith in God, he will use you no matter who you are, no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing. Number 2, God does not solely work in the extraordinary. He works in the ordinary too. Look for him in your day-to-day life, in the small little things. Do not limit God just by your expectations of him or your desires of him. And number 3, God's favor cannot be bought. It's gained through obedience and faith. So then we can go back to that first question. Who is the hero of the story? Is it Naaman, this man who tried to use his wealth to find healing? Is it the king of Aram who sends a letter to try and get his, servant healed? Is it the king of Israel? Is it Elisha? Or is it the servants? This servant girl who had faith in God and shared it with her master, going, hey, there's a guy in Samaria who can heal you. Is it the servants who basically told him, calm down, go wash yourself and see what happens. You don't have anything to lose. Because I think we can all relate to that a little bit. We're all the little guy. We're all the little person at some point in our lives. And we might not like our circumstances. I can't imagine these servants, wanted to be a servant. I'm sure they wanted to be free. They wanted to go live their own life. But had this servant girl kept to herself and kept her faith to herself and her beliefs to herself, he would have never been healed. Had his servants never spoken up to him when he was in this rage and calmed him down, had they not been like, hey, you might as well try it, he would have never been healed. Again, God can use the little person because it's not about us. It's not about who we are. It's not about our wealth. It's not about any of that. It's all about him. It's all about his power, his glory. And it's just about us being obedient, having faith, and trusting in him. So, yeah. I'd make the argument that the hero is the servants. But will you now please bow your heads and pray with me? Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you for this story. Thank you for the servants that were able to find Naaman healing. For the servant girl who spoke up when she didn't have to. For the servants who cared about their master when they didn't have to. And I'd ask that you would reveal those servants in our lives, the people that look out for us and heal us, the people who continue to share their faith with us and continue to help us out. And I'd ask that you would make us like these servants. You would make us bold to step out in our faith and share it with other people. I'd ask you to make us consistent, to hold each other to you, to help us encourage each other to obey your commands, even when they don't seem logical, even when they're not what we're expecting. I'd ask that you would just make us obedient servants to you, that we would continue to trust in you and have faith in you. To realize it's not about us. It's not about who we are. It's not about our wealth. It's not about our power. It's all about you. And I'd ask that, like these servants, you would make us a servant, so that we can continue to worship you and do your will and listen to your commands. Amen. We will now sing the hymn of surrender, number 399 in the hymnal. It is "Take My Life and Let It Be."